Have you ever felt like you're constantly giving explanations no one asked for? As if every step you take, every choice you make, every quiet moment you embrace needs to be justified, as if simply existing requires a reason. It's exhausting, isn't it? Maybe you've caught yourself explaining why you're tired, why you didn't want to go out, why you chose to take care of yourself, as if choosing yourself was somehow a betrayal, a sin you must account for. And without even realizing it, you begin to ask for permission to exist. You carry this invisible burden, constantly explaining yourself as if you owe the world an apology for being who you are. It's like walking around with a heavy backpack full of silent regrets. I'm sorry I didn't fit in. I'm sorry I wasn't enough. The more you speak, the further you drift from yourself. We live in a world that teaches us from an early age to please, to adapt, to mold ourselves so we don't make others uncomfortable. So we become masters of justification. We learn to turn our feelings into arguments, into defensive speeches, because somewhere along the way, we were made to believe that our emotions must be validated by others before they can be real. But eventually, something deep inside you whispers, enough. Enough of translating yourself so others can understand. Enough of begging for acceptance, disguised as explanation. Sometimes silence is not surrender. Sometimes it's the first act of self-respect. Because silence can also be a boundary, a firm, quiet line that says, I no longer need to convince you of my truth. What if true self-love begins at the very moment you stop explaining yourself? Have you ever stopped to ask where this compulsive need to explain everything comes from? It's not just a habit, it's a wound. There is something ancient within you, something that fears being misunderstood. Maybe it goes back to your childhood, to that moment when you learned that if you didn't explain yourself well enough, you'd be rejected, or worse, abandoned. So you started overanalyzing every word, every action, monitoring your own behavior as if you were walking on a minefield, where one wrong step could mean emotional exile. This is emotional memory echoing through your soul. Don't say that. What will people think? Be quiet. That's not appropriate. If you act like that, no one will love you. And those words planted a seed inside you, a seed of doubt, a doubt that whispers, maybe I'm not enough as I am. That seed grows into a creeping vine, wrapping around your voice, suffocating your authenticity, dulling your peace. And without realizing it, you begin to live like you constantly need to prove you deserve to be here. But it's not your fault. This is what you learned in order to survive. In a world that often punishes vulnerability and glorifies the mask. Still, every mask tightens over time. Eventually, you can't breathe beneath it anymore, because living to be understood is a slow death in the silence of your own soul. You have the right to be yourself, even if no one understands you. You have the right to feel, without giving explanations. You have the right to exist, even if your story can't be explained in neat, tidy words. And what if the fear of being misunderstood is just a reflection of a childhood where no one truly took the time to understand you? We tend to believe that speaking is a way to set ourselves free, but sometimes speaking too much becomes a prison made of invisible bars. When you feel the need to explain every no, every decision that breaks expectations, every instinct that deviates from the mold, your voice is no longer an expression. It becomes a defense, a shield, a wall, a silent plea to be accepted. And little by little, without even noticing, you stop speaking to express yourself and start speaking to protect yourself. You speak from fear, from guilt, from that old belief that if you don't explain every little thing, you'll lose someone's love. And that kind of speaking, it drains you. It tires your soul, weighs on your chest, dims the light in your eyes. Explaining everything, all the time, is like standing trial every day, where you play the accused, the lawyer, and the judge. You punish yourself for feeling what you feel, and then you struggle to make it all sound acceptable. And still, sometimes they don't believe you, they don't understand you, they don't hear you. Has that ever happened to you? Speaking out of fear is like trying to stop a storm with your bare hands. The words become fragile, nervous, stripped of truth, and your heart, despite all its efforts, remains alone. Your soul knows when you speak from love and when you speak from fear of not being enough. And deep down, you know it too. You feel that difference in your throat, in your stomach, in your chest. And there, in that awareness, a painful but freeing truth emerges. No matter how much you explain, those who don't want to understand you never will. Not because of who you are now, but because they never tried to see you from the beginning. And maybe, just maybe, it's time. Time to stop speaking just to convince and start embracing silence to begin healing. There's a moment in life, a quiet, raw, but beautiful moment, when you realize that silence isn't emptiness, it's shelter, a place without words where finally you can hear yourself again. And no, I'm not talking about the uncomfortable silence, the kind that feels like punishment. I'm speaking about a kind of silence that embraces you, not the absence of sound, but the sacred presence that arrives after countless internal battles. It's not the kind of silence that screams in your chest or pleads to be broken. This silence doesn't demand explanations. It doesn't ask for anything in return. It simply is. It exists alongside you, like a gentle witness to everything you've carried within. And in its presence, you feel, maybe for the first time, what it means to be completely seen without judgment. This silence does not question your pain. It doesn't interrogate your sadness, your fears, or your moments of uncertainty. It doesn't try to fix you or mold you into something more convenient, more acceptable. It doesn't ask you to be okay. Instead, it meets you exactly where you are. It says, you don't have to explain why you feel this way. Just rest. And it is in this silence, listen carefully now, that your soul finally finds a place to breathe, to exhale, without fear of being misunderstood. Because speaking can be exhausting, especially when your words are shaped by wounds, when your voice trembles under the weight of what you've endured. But silence, when chosen consciously, not imposed, becomes a form of healing. It becomes medicine, not the kind that numbs the pain, but the kind that brings you back to yourself, in that sacred space where you no longer feel the need to justify your existence. Something incredible begins to happen. You start to reclaim your voice, not the one you use to speak to the world, but the quiet one within that has always guided you. The voice of your truth, your intuition, your essence. And in that moment, something begins to soften. The sharpness of the pain dulls. The fire of resentment transforms into a quiet flame of awareness. The need for external validation fades away, and in its place, you find something far more powerful, the permission to simply be. To be silent is not to run away. To be silent is not to surrender. To be silent, in its truest form, is to return home, to yourself. It's to look within and say, without a single word, I believe you. I see you. I choose you. Because not everything has to be understood. Not everything has to be explained. There are feelings that are meant to be felt, not translated. There are moments when your silence is not avoidance, it's protection. And there are people in your life who may never deserve the explanation you keep trying to offer them. So close your eyes, take a deep breath, and allow yourself to listen, truly listen, without needing to speak. Perhaps in that stillness, your real journey back home begins. Home, not as a place, but as a state of being where you no longer abandon yourself for the sake of others. When was the last time you truly chose yourself, without guilt? Do you even remember? Or has it become so normal to put yourself last, waiting for someone else to validate your worth, that you've forgotten what it feels like to be your own priority? Choosing yourself is not selfishness. It is emotional survival. It's an act of radical self-respect. It's standing in front of the mirror and saying, no more. No more depletion. No more over-explaining. No more trying to convince others that I am worthy of love, rest, or understanding. But I know, I really do, that the day you decide to place yourself first, something inside you shakes, because you were taught to please others, to yield, to smile even when you're breaking, to sacrifice yourself for the comfort of everyone around you. And when you finally say no, without any justification, the world shifts. The masks fall. Some people walk away. Others get angry. Why? Because you're no longer the version of yourself they constructed to meet their needs. And yes, it hurts. It stings to be misunderstood, to be left behind by those who once claimed to care. But you know what? It's real. It's liberation. It's rebirth. Choosing yourself is an act of courage, because when you do, you are also saying goodbye to the version of you who waited endlessly to be chosen by others. You are burying the compulsion to explain your wounds, your pauses, your path. And yes, it's terrifying, because choosing yourself might mean standing alone for a while. But let me tell you something from the depths of my own experience. The solitude that comes from choosing yourself is not a punishment. It is a cleansing. It is sacred space to heal, to reconstruct your identity, to remember that your value is not up for negotiation, not determined by what others accept or fail to understand. There is a quiet power in saying, today, I don't need to explain myself. Today, I just need to honor myself. And even if no one sees that moment, even if the world doesn't clap for you, it will remain one of the holiest decisions you've ever made. But let's not pretend it's easy. Many of us spent years silent out of fear, not choice. That's a different kind of silence. A silence that doesn't heal. It suffocates. A silence that wraps around your throat like a knot because you've convinced yourself that speaking up will only bring more pain. And yes, sometimes talking hurts, but staying silent, when that silence is rooted in fear, can be even more damaging. Have you felt it? That choking silence where you swallow your truth to avoid conflict, where you bury your feelings just so you don't make anyone uncomfortable. That kind of silence is like swallowing glass. Invisible, but sharp enough to break you from within. And worst of all, with time, you get used to it. You become skilled at smiling when you want to scream. You say, I'm fine, when everything in you is trembling. You learn to fake calm while chaos rages beneath your skin. But silence born from fear is not peace. It is a quiet war, one where the battlefield is your own body, your own mind, your own heart. And that internal war, day after day, drains your spirit. It steals your glow. It convinces you that you don't have the right to exist fully, to take up space, to be heard. Eventually, you lose the ability to identify what you feel because you've silenced yourself for so long that you no longer recognize the map of your emotions. So what's the difference between the silence that heals and the silence that destroys? One word: intention. The healing silence comes from choosing yourself. The destructive silence comes from fearing the loss of someone else. One whispers, "Today, I will care for myself." The other murmurs, "I'm not worthy of being heard." But you are. You are worthy. Worthy of spaces where your voice doesn't need to defend itself, where it simply gets to exist. You deserve relationships where silence is a moment of peace, not a prison. And if you haven't found those spaces yet, be that space. Be the one who listens to your own soul. Be the one who allows your heart to speak, and also to rest in silence, when that is the truest expression of self-love. One day, and you won't know exactly when or how, but one day, something inside you will quietly break, not in anger, not in sadness, but in a strange, sacred stillness. A calm knowing will rise in you, and that day, without a big announcement, without drama, you will simply say, "Enough." And that day will change you forever, because you will finally realize that you no longer owe anyone an explanation. Not because you feel superior, but because you now understand. Anyone who truly loves you, anyone who truly sees you, doesn't need you to justify your existence. It will be a quiet day, a holy day, a day where you choose not to answer certain questions, where you stop giving reasons for your fatigue, your distance, your boundaries, where you stop translating your soul so others can understand its language. Because constantly explaining yourself is a form of begging for permission. Permission to feel, to choose, to be. But no one else holds that power. They never did. Only you can grant yourself that freedom. To stop explaining doesn't mean to close yourself off. It means to open yourself more fully to your truth, to your intuition, to the wisdom within that knows some choices are not made with logic, but with the heart. Because the decisions that come from the soul may not always be rational, but they are always real. And the truth, when it's real, never needs a justification. So, you realize that silence isn't emptiness, it's wholeness. It's telling the world, "I no longer live to be understood. I live to simply be." And from that place, you begin to attract people who don't over-explain themselves either, because they just feel you, they resonate with you, they honor your energy. And that is freedom. Some wounds don't bleed, but they speak. They speak without asking permission. They speak even when you wish they'd stay quiet. Sometimes it's old pain that pushes you to explain too much, to justify every action, every emotion, every absence, as if through words you could stop the pain from returning. But it's not your voice that needs to be heard. It's your wound. Do you remember that time you said, "This hurts," and they told you you were overreacting? When you asked for love and they called you needy? From that moment, your soul learned that in order to be heard, it had to explain itself. And you started repeating yourself over and over again, hoping that this time someone would understand, that this time someone would stay. The truth is, you never wanted to talk so much. You just wish someone would say, even once, "You don't need to explain. I see you." You wanted to feel safe being who you are. You longed to be accepted without needing a mask. That's why you spoke so much, not for attention, but out of fear of being abandoned. Each word was a silent plea. Can you see me now? Do you understand me now? Are you going to leave me again? But there's a truth that even though it hurts, sets you free. The person who doesn't want to see you won't, no matter how loud you scream. And the one who does want to see you doesn't need you to say a thing, because soul recognizes soul, and that doesn't need to be explained, it's simply felt. So take a deep breath, turn inward, and speak only when your heart decides, not when the wound demands. Because you are not your explanations, you are the truth that lives behind them. There's a kind of exhaustion that sleep can't cure. It's a soul-deep weariness, not from your body, but from years spent explaining yourself, defending yourself, trying to be understood by people who never truly wanted to listen. Have you ever felt that? Speaking from the heart, and all you get is silence, sharing your wounds with someone who only responds with judgment or apathy, hoping for an empathetic glance, but getting criticism instead. That hurts. But what hurts more isn't the cold reaction. It's the echo of your soul, feeling invisible all over again. And so little by little, something inside you starts to fade. You stop talking like before. You stop sharing with the same light in your voice. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you finally understood. Some places are not meant for your truth. The soul gets tired when it's ignored, when its voice becomes noise to others, when its emotions are dismissed, mocked, rejected. And that's when many of us learn to stay silent, not out of choice, but for protection. Because sometimes it hurts less to stay quiet than to feel again the wound of not being heard. But that's not healing. That's hiding your pain beneath the rug of your soul. And sooner or later, that rug gets lifted. That's why today, I invite you to pause, not to explain yourself, but to hold yourself. Close your eyes and ask, where did I exhaust myself from talking too much? When did my soul go unheard? And what do I need now to begin truly listening to myself? Because when you listen with love, when you stop demanding explanations from yourself, that's when real healing begins. We live in a world that demands smiles, a world uncomfortable with raw pain, a world that wants you to say, I'm fine, even if you're falling apart inside. And little by little, you learn to justify your sadness, to explain why you're not okay, to offer valid reasons, hoping people won't walk away when they see your tears, as if feeling deeply was a flaw, as if your pain needed a signed approval to be real. But no, pain doesn't need to be explained. Pain deserves to be honored. You don't need to justify your tears. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your sorrow. You're not required to dress up what's breaking inside you with pretty words. Because pain isn't looking for approval. It's looking for presence. It needs space to breathe. It needs your arms, not your arguments. And you know what's the saddest part? That pain often grows, not because of what it feels like, but because of how often you feel forced to justify it. I'm just tired, you say. I've had a rough week. Sorry, it's just stress. Lies dressed as explanations. To avoid discomfort, to stay accepted, to not be seen as weak, dramatic, or negative. But feeling doesn't make you weak. Denying what you feel, that's what breaks you. So today, let yourself feel, without guilt, without explaining, without covering it up. Your pain doesn't need logical proof to be valid. Your soul already knows, and all it's asking of you is to stop fighting with what you feel. Make silence your temple, and within that temple, let your pain speak, free of judgment. Here begins true emotional freedom. There's a silent belief that lives in many wounded hearts, the idea that if you open your soul completely, you'll be more loved, and so you share everything. You undress emotionally, confess your most intimate wounds, hoping that someone, upon seeing your raw sincerity, will hold you tighter. But it doesn't always happen that way. Not everyone is ready to hold your truth. Not everyone has the sensitivity to receive what you've kept quiet for years. And most painfully, not everyone deserves it. Your truth is sacred. It's not a speech to persuade, not a product to be approved. Your truth is a fire. It can illuminate or it can burn. It all depends on where you place it. And many times, in the name of love or the desire for closeness, you gave yourself completely to people who lacked the ability or the intention to truly understand you. People who turned your vulnerability into judgment, who used your confessions as weapons, who saw your sincerity as weakness. So you shut down. You promised never to open up again. But that's not fair to you. The mistake wasn't trusting. The mistake wasn't speaking. The pain came from not recognizing who did and who didn't deserve that sacred part of you. Learning to choose who gets to hear your truth is an act of self-love. It's saying, my story isn't for just anyone. It's for those who know how to honor it. Because there are those who only want to know you to control you. And there are those who listen to protect you. The difference lies in their presence, their energy, their intention. Not everyone deserves your silence, and not everyone deserves your voice. Both are gifts. So don't blame yourself for having revealed yourself. But from now on, open up only where your soul feels safe. Sometimes, talking too much becomes a form of forgetting, an elegant distraction, an ancient strategy to avoid feeling what truly lives inside you. Because while you talk, analyze, justify, explain, you drift away from yourself. You dissolve into the other person. You get lost in the maze of what others expect from you. But when you choose silence, not the kind that's imposed, but the sacred kind, something inside you aligns. The pieces begin to fall into place. Chaos finds a center. Silence, at this level, is not hiding. It's returning. It's allowing yourself to hear what the noise of the world had drowned out. That soft, persistent, authentic voice. The voice of your soul. That's when you realize you have nothing to prove. You're not here to please or to fit in. You came to remember who you are, not to explain yourself. In that silence, external judgments dissolve. The need to be understood fades, and in its place, certainty arises. You don't need to be understood to have value, because your worth doesn't lie in how well you can explain your pain, but in how deeply you dare to dwell in it. Silence then becomes a medicine, a way to reconnect, a mirror where you finally recognize yourself, without ornaments, without scripts, without defenses, and you begin to see that everything you were looking for on the outside was waiting quietly, patiently, lovingly, within, silent, still, present. You remain quiet to remember, quiet to return, quiet to heal. Because sometimes the road back to yourself begins with one simple, powerful silence. There's a quiet moment, almost imperceptible, when something inside you changes. There are no screams, no drama, just an inner decision. Firm, calm, final. I won't beg anymore. And it's not pride, it's not coldness, it's dignity waking up. It's self-love finally rising from the ground where it knelt for so long. Because yes, you did beg. You begged with explanations. You begged with apologies you didn't owe. You begged with sweet words that masked pain. You begged through anxious silences, hoping the other person would notice your absence. And that begging wasn't always obvious. Sometimes it disguised itself as patience or excessive understanding or pretending everything was fine. But your soul remembers it all. It remembers how you dimmed your light so as not to bother, how you got lost just to be loved, how you explained yourself over and over again, hoping to be enough. Until one day, you choose yourself, not out of anger, but out of love. A love so deep, so true, that it no longer allows you to keep giving away your pieces to those who don't honor them. Because the soul that chooses itself stops begging, stops explaining, stops waiting. It begins to walk. It walks without resentment, but with memory. It walks without revenge, but with boundaries. It walks with the heart in hand, not to offer it, but to finally hold it. And in that step, everything changes, not outside, but inside of you. Silence becomes your companion. Solitude becomes your home, and you finally become your own safe place. To convince, what a heavy word when it's born out of fear. Convincing someone that you're enough, that you're worth staying for, that your feelings aren't too much, that your wounds aren't a burden. It's a dance that drains you, a conversation that echoes endlessly in your chest. What if I explain it better? What if this time they understand me? What if I change a little, just so they won't leave? But you don't see that every time you do, you're betraying yourself, piece by piece. You let go of your essence, just to fit in. You reshape your love to make it acceptable. You soften your truths so they won't disturb. And what ends up hurting the most isn't even the rejection. It's everything you had to stop being to avoid it. Until one day, you've had enough. Not of them, but of yourself. Of looking at your reflection and not recognizing who you've become. Of realizing that trying to convince someone is a golden prison, shiny on the outside, suffocating within. That day, your soul makes a promise. Never again. No more begging to be understood by someone who chooses not to see you. No more translating yourself. No more performing to be loved. That day, words shrink. You only say what truly matters, what rises from your core. And if they don't understand, that's okay, because your truth isn't up for debate. It's meant to be lived. Whoever has a soul will feel it. So lower your voice, not out of fear, but like someone guarding a treasure. Your truth doesn't need volume, only direction. There is no act more intimate or more powerful than the moment you decide to go quiet. And in that silence, you choose yourself. You don't stay quiet out of surrender, but out of self-respect. You're not silent because you fear the response, but because you finally love yourself enough to stop chasing it. Because you now know that some battles are not won through words, but through letting go. Silence can also say, I owe you nothing. I don't need your approval to exist. What I know about myself is enough. And that is an inner revolution. For years, they taught you that your worth depended on being understood, on being clear, on being coherent for others. But no one ever told you that your worth also lives in your silence, that your voice remains alive even when you don't speak, that you are still whole even when you don't explain yourself. In that silence, something new begins, a reunion, a rebirth, a reconciliation with yourself. You stop trying to persuade, you stop needing to please, you simply crave peace. And peace doesn't shout, peace doesn't argue. Peace settles in when you no longer bargain with your truth. So yes, silence is an act of love, of power, of maturity. Silence to avoid betraying yourself. Silence to break the cycle. Silence because sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's self-choosing. And in that sacred instant, true healing begins. Tell me, how many times have you broken just to be understood? How many times have you drowned in explanations no one asked for, just to avoid feeling unwanted? How many times have you muted your own essence, thinking that would make them love you more? And now that you've made it this far, you begin to see just how much strength lives in your silence. How beautiful it is to not have to explain who you are. Maybe healing doesn't happen when you finally say everything. Maybe it happens when you no longer feel the need to say anything at all. Maybe the soul doesn't crave words, it craves presence. It wants you to stay, to hold yourself fully, to choose you, even if no one else does. This video was a space to remind you of something incredibly important. You are not defined by your explanations. You don't need to convince anyone to deserve love. And sometimes, choosing to stay silent is the deepest act of self-love you can offer yourself. So now, I invite you to share in the comments the moment in your life when you first felt like you had to explain yourself all the time. Reflect on what might happen if today you decided to embrace silence, and in that silence, reconnect with yourself. If this message touched something deep within your soul, I ask you from the bottom of my heart to support this channel with a big like. That small gesture helps us continue creating these spaces of depth and healing for thousands of people just like you. Don't forget to subscribe and activate the notification bell so you never miss the next video that will appear right here on your screen. That next video will be another step on your journey back home. Because, as Carl Jung said, what you resist persists, what you accept transforms, and you are already ready to transform.